Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Gaston. I'm the Civic Design Center's Chief Executive Officer, and I want to thank you all on behalf of our board and our staff for joining us this evening for our February Urban Design Forum. And look at this share. Oh, full screen. Okay. Before we start with our program, I would like to spend just a couple minutes telling you a little bit about our history as an organization, our mission, and some of the work that we do, because we realize that a lot of people are probably joining us for the first time at an event. Our history, the catalyst for the organization, goes back to the mid-90s when a highway was proposed through the middle of our downtown core. And a group of very active designers and urban planners and residents and citizens got together because they didn't think that this was the best decision from a civic planning standpoint for our city. And they were able to make change happen. And that was the birth of the Urban Design Forum. This group kept continually meeting, and eventually they formed an organization that became the Civic Design Center in 2000. We meet at this event monthly to discuss urban design practices, best practices, hear from experts across the country, hear about local projects, and eject ways into the conversation about how our public can have a voice in making change happen. And that is absolutely the part of our mission, which is to advocate for civic design visions and actionable change in communities to improve quality of life for all. Some of the focus areas of our work include education and advocacy, shaping healthy communities, mobility and land use, and reclaiming public space. And you can learn more about the scope of our work on our website, which is civicdesigncenter.org. And some of the programs that we have, in addition to the Urban Design Forum, we host a quarterly Pachakcha in Nashville. We have our annual Parking Day, our continuing education course called Socially Conscious Design 101. And we offer multiple tours throughout the year. And we have a young professionals group called Civic Advocates. And then our programs, many of you have participated in or have been involved with, from Design Your Neighborhood to our projects associated with Mars Pet Care, Design with Pets in Mind, our tactical urbanism group, Turbo, and our ongoing each semester project with the University of Tennessee College of Architecture's Urban Design Studio. This is our 20th year as an organization. So this is our birthday, our 20th year birthday. So we hope that you'll celebrate with us all this year and looking at the impact of the work that we've had over the last 20 years. This is a graphic that shows just some of the statistics on what we've been able to accomplish during our 20 years. And we hope that you'll be a part of our next 20 years. So I just want to recognize and thank our presenting sponsors for the year, Amazon, Global Furniture Group, and Mars Pet Care. And we have many, many other sponsors that help support the work that we do, and we want to thank them all as well. And if your company is not currently signed up as a sponsor, or if you would like to join as an individual member, we ask that you can go to our website and select a level that's appropriate for you to help support the impactful work we're doing here in Nashville, Middle Tennessee, and increasingly on a regional and national scale. So with that, I am just so thrilled about our program tonight, recognizing history, the history of Africatown, and the exciting discussion about the design competition that's ahead. And we'll hear more from Renee, but I am also thrilled that this is a program that can recognize Black History Month and celebrate Black History Month. And we are extraordinarily happy and thrilled to be partnering with NOMA Nashville chapter, National Organization of Minority Architects. And this is the first of several events that we'll be co-hosting and working together with NOMA on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph Cole, who is the president of NOMA Nash chapter. And he can tell you more about NOMA and introduce Valerie, who will be giving us some more intros. So let me exit out of this sharing. And I'll thank you, Joseph, so much. I'll turn it over to you now.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and happy Black History Month. Welcome to Recognizing History. Africatown Design Competition, a joint event with the Civic Design Center and the Nashville chapter of NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects. I'm Joseph Cole, the current president of the Nashville chapter of NOMA. For those who are unfamiliar with NOMA, we're an architecture-based organization centered on increasing representation and advocating for Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color in the field of architecture. If interested in learning how to become active in our organization or support our mission, you can find more information about our chapter at nomanash.com. I have the honor of introducing Valerie Franklin. Valerie, AIA NOMA, is an architect and senior associate at the 2021 Firm of the Year, Moody Nolan. Valerie is a founding member and the immediate past chapter president of the Nashville chapter of NOMA here in Nashville. Valerie is a Tuskegee University graduate and brings over 21 years of experience with a wide variety of experience, including healthcare, corporate, religious, and institutional architecture design. Valerie is a Nashville native and is an advocate for others. She serves her native city of Nashville on the Metro Development and Housing Agency's Design Review Committee, as well as the Plumbing Board of Appeals. She's deeply attuned to the political, social, and cultural pulse of her community and finds time to make impactful contributions to her industry and community. Valerie strives to continually be an asset to the Nashville community and to be both a voice and a sounding board for minorities in our city. Valerie also serves on the board of directors for the AIA Tennessee and the Civic Design Center, and she has been recognized by AIA National as a citizen architect.
Thank you, Joseph, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is with extreme excitement and pleasure that I have the honor of introducing Renee Kemp-Rotan to you all. I remember the first time I heard Renee speak on Africatown. I was so touched, I literally wanted everybody in the whole wide world to hear her speak on this. Just to hear this story and to hear this truth. And so I'm extremely glad that you all have logged on tonight for this experience, and it will be an experience. Please have pen and paper ready during this lecture. I promise me you'll thank me later. Now, about this phenomenal woman who is Renee Kemp-Rotan. Renee is CEO of StudioRotan. She's an urban designer and master planner. She is actually the first African-American woman to graduate from Syracuse University as an architecture major, and she graduated with honors. Renee also attended the Architectural Association in London and graduated from Columbia University with a master's degree in urban and regional planning. She is heavily involved with diversity and inclusion councils for AIA, which is American Institute of Architects, and NOMA, and has directed AIA's Design, Education, and Practice Division, and the National Endowment for the Arts Design Demonstration and National Design Competition programs. She has served 10 mayors as urban policy designer in DC, New York City, Atlanta, including master planning 8 communities for the 1996 Olympics, and went on to serve as Director of Economic Development of Atlanta and Chief Urban Design and Development, where her works included master planning for the Atlanta Aquarium, Olympic Park, and construction liaison to the construction of Phillips Arena. She now resides in Birmingham, where she has directed planning for over $200 million capital projects, the Roadway Reservation Park, Crossplex, and the Birmingham Civil Rights Heritage Trail. Her works are included in the African American National Biography, edited by Henry Louis Gates, and she has publications by Harvard University, the W.E.B. Du Bois Center, Oxford University, and the African American Research Center. She has lectured worldwide, so we're glad to have her here in our presence. And she's lectured on issues on design and social impact, and has contributed her knowledge to the National Museum of African American History in DC and Culture, Cairo University, MIT, Harvard University, Cooper Hewitt, Howard University, Florida A&M University, Georgia Tech, Auburn University, University of Michigan, and my alma mater, Tuskegee University, and more. She is a contributing editor to the Encyclopedia of Vernacular Architecture of the World. Her works has led as lead designer of the International Grand Egyptian Museum Competition, placed 21st among 2,000 worldwide entries. Presently, Renee Kemp-Rotan is working with MOVE, the community, AIA, and NOMA to develop an international design competition for the design to commemorate Africatown, the site of the last African slave cargo ship in Mobile, Alabama. Which brings us to why we're here tonight. They're saying that I'm moderating this lecture, but my only job is to get you ready to receive this message. So this is the last call for pen and paper. You're gonna need it. Renee we're so pleased to have you with us here tonight. Everyone, please join me in welcoming our national and international treasure, Renee Kemp-Rotan.
Very good, Valerie. I enjoyed that myself, I must say. I want to thank Noma Nash. I want to thank the Civic Design Center for having me to do something that I love doing, which is talking about design, neighborhoods, cultural identity, history, heritage. You touched all of my buttons here. So I'm so glad to be here because this is a passion project. You'll find that once you age, hopefully with grace, you get to a point of being able to select those projects that you really want to get involved in. And this one has stolen my heart. I hope that you all will enjoy hearing some of my findings as much as I have thoroughly enjoyed discovering Africatown. Should I start share screen now?
Yes, please, Renee, go for it.
Okay, let's see, here we are from the beginning. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to introduce you to the concept of the Africatown International Design Idea Competition, which is going to be launched Juneteenth of this year, 2021. I have so much to talk about. I'm really going to have to keep myself very calm as I go through introducing you to my passion project. Here are our competition sponsors: AIA, NOMA, Visit Mobile, and then we have some more sponsors to thank at the end of the entire presentation as people have signed on. But I thought that what I would do is start with who I am, to give you an idea of how I got involved in this business. On the left, here I am with my 2 sons and my 4 grandchildren, including a set of fraternal twins. On the right are some of the snapshots of travel that I've taken worldwide. I've been to 33 countries and counting, and I always produce a book at the end of the travel. The picture on the lower right is my favorite. That's the time that I spent with the silverback gorillas in Rwanda. I've been to the Himalayas, I've been to Mount Everest, and a lot of my notion about what to bring to community really comes directly from these travels. In terms of my education, my academic influences are these. Syracuse University, I finished in '75 as the first Black woman to graduate in architecture. The middle emblem is the emblem of the Architectural Association, one of the most fantastic intellectual experiences for designers in the world, located in London. And then last we'll see Columbia University. At the AA, I was able to study group, look them up. They were futurist, progressive travelers in space. And they're the ones who first invented the notion of the walking city, cities that move around you as cities interpret their history for you. My other academic influences are the guy that has the circle around his head, which is Paul Oliver. He was a member of the Royal Institute of Cultural Geographers and taught me world history at the AA for 2 solid years, and I studied under Archaeologists for 2 years. Because of Paul, I was able to go to Ghana. These are photos that I took in 1974. I went to villages that you couldn't even find on a map. But I won a research fellowship at the AA, and my mission was to record 101 ways to build housing out of mud in Ghana. So I've been all over Ghana, and this Africatown story resonated for me because of this also. Paul based encyclopedia for the study of vernacular architecture. If you can get a hold of it, get a hold of it. It's really precious. Then I thought what I would and projects that I worked on. I think it's very meaningful to talk about shifting landscape architects and planners, 1968 till now, that was put together by Michelle Wilkinson at the Smithsonian Black Museum on the Mall, where the Smithsonian for days talked to Black designers as activists. And so that's another part of my history. I am an activist. And these are all of the meetings and all of the books and all of the interactions that I've had dealing with civic design. I want to bring your attention to a book almost smack dab in the center called How to Save Your Own Street that was published by Doubleday. I was the ghost writer for that book for the Urban Design Group in New York, where I worked and cut my teeth on urban design. I had the pleasure of working an entire summer with Jackie Onassis. Her picture is above the book, because at that time, Jackie Onassis was an editor at Doubleday, and my job was to take the galleys to her and talk about the layout of the book. So that's one of the high moments of my life. The other thing that was very important about that interaction was the Urban Design Group was kind of an in-house architecture firm that was embedded in the Planning Commission at City Hall in New York City. And as fate would have it, there were 20 international architects on board as part of staff. I was chosen to do the ghost writing because I was American, I spoke English very well, and I also wrote very well. Had it not been for those talents, I would not have been given the assignment, and I would not have been able to have worked with Jackie Onassis. I also lectured at the Sorbonne on Josephine Baker and her influence on European designers, on and on and on and on. So the main thing to understand about me as a professional is that design has always been my method of inquiry. Here are some of the projects that I've done throughout the 30 years that I've been practicing. In Washington, DC, I was able to design the plaza for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. In Atlanta during the Olympics, I worked on Memorial Drive and then 8 Olympic neighborhoods, including the Alegba project, which basically dealt with creating a pedestrian walk-through theater on civil rights films that would take you from Peachtree Street to the King Center. Here are some projects that I worked on while in Birmingham, Alabama. The Birmingham Civil Rights Heritage Trail is at the top. I also was the master planner for the Railroad Park. We beat out Villa and Scofidio one year for ULI. That's me walking with Tom Leader. And I also was the master planner for Crossplex on 40 acres of city-owned land, trying to turn that into an Olympic village for children, using the experience that I had garnered while working as a master planner for the Atlanta Olympics. And then the picture on the right is a picture of a master plan that I put together with Craig Hoskins, who used to be the Southeast Regional Vice President for NOMA. What we have here is a church that during the civil rights era, a white church was donated back to the city because of white flight. The congregation got out of Birmingham and left the city with this beautiful church. So for the last, I don't know how many years, we've been working on converting this church into the Alabama Gospel Center for the Cultural Arts. Just another way in which cultural identity can also squeeze its way into our urban design professions. Competitions, I'm really big on competitions. I've entered the Grand Egyptian Museum competition, came in 21. I also entered the San Francisco competition to design the subway plaza for milk. And then I just entered the competition for Philadelphia to design the gateway to a burial ground of 5,000 slave bodies that were found up under a public playground just recently. I did not place, but soon the winners of this competition will be publicly announced. So this is kind of how I got to Mobile. My history is such that I've spent my entire career looking at urban design, master planning, cultural heritage, and the design of cities. So I find myself in Mobile because one of my dearest friends who had worked with me on the Birmingham Civil Rights Heritage Trail, I had hired her as a researcher, Vicki Howell, a journalist. She's from Mobile. Her mother got sick. She moved back to Mobile, but she kept in touch and kept telling me I had to come see Africatown. By that time, I had lived in Birmingham for about 15 years. I'd never heard of Africatown. So Vicki Howell was my introduction, and she also was past president of the Mobile NAACP. So that's the story. In 2019, the Clotilda slave ship was discovered in the Mobile River. Now there's international attention on this last slave ship that came to America at the end of the Civil War. But it's a tale of two cities, and it's a tale of multiple experiences that got me really involved in this story. So here's the story. In 1860, 19th century, 110 Africans were brought from Benin, Dahomey, and Nigeria to the Mobile Bay on this ship called Clotilda. It was the last slave cargo ship to come to America. And it was really because of a bet by very wealthy boat owners each other that they could not illegally go to Africa, smuggle 110 Africans back to enslave, because at that time, the international trade, slave trade had been deemed illegal. So the Africatown story starts at the beginning of this illegal bet that happened in 1860. After 5 years of enslavement, these 110 Africans basically 32 of them decided that they would buy their own land, build their, after their efforts to hire a ship to take them back to Africa became very unsuccessful. So today what we have are the vestiges of this very unique African-made settlement in the Deep South, in Mobile, Alabama. And many vestiges of this settlement remain. It's spread over, the history of Africatown is spread between two cities, Pritchard and Mobile, and we can throw in Chickasaw also. So what once was an African town is now an African-American neighborhood of descendants of the people who got off of the ship in 1860. It's an unbelievable American story. Africatown is the only settlement that was built by Africans in America, and it's suffering generations of neglect. So why a competition? In 2018, Vicki Howell, my friend, got me down to Mobile, Alabama, and she had this drawing on the lower right-hand side that I call Scribble Scrabble. She hates for me to call it that. But she was trying to basically record all of the community actions and activities and city interventions that were going on in Africatown. She handed me the paper and said, do something. And I was like, my God, what do you do with that much activity? So I reached down into my urban design bag of tricks, and I pulled out the tool that I've used many times myself called the urban design competition. And I said, you know, I think to try to figure out how all of these various actions are related, we might be able to host a design competition that could solve the problem. And one thing that's about design competition is that you always have more than one answer. So it gives you a whole bunch of options for problem solving. Okay, so why Africatown? Well, it's a very unique American place. but it's been threatened by generations upon generations, 160 years of neglect. And while there is a lot of excitement about finding this boat that is the artifact and the evidence of the enslavement, and the whole world is watching what's going to happen with this boat that's still underwater, there's still a lot of marine archaeology that is going on, measurements, findings underwater. But while that's going on, the community of Africatown is saying, well, what about the community? What is going to be the narrative of how we explain this history back to the United States and also back to our friends and families? For years, there was denial that the ship ever existed, because the ship, in fact, once it reached the coast of Mobile, because it was illegal, it was burned by the owners in order to destroy evidence of this smuggling operation. So on one hand, you have the dominant culture denying that anything ever happened. And then on the other hand, you have the descendants of the people who got off the ship having exquisite blood memory about what they remember their ancestors telling them. So what's the story? I have a couple of African proverbs here. More precious than our children are the children of our children. And that's where the blood memory comes in. From the telling of the stories that get handed down and repeated and repeated and repeated. And so the other African proverb is, family names are like flowers. They blossom in clusters. And so really the one thing to remember is this is about 110 Africans that were smuggled into Alabama. 32 of them collaborated to create this town. And they consisted of basically 12 families that got off of the boat. There were 12 names on it. Here we have a lot of the work that I have done has been with the descendants of Africatown, of the Clotilda. And here we have Jocelyn Davis, who is related to Charlie Lewis. And this young woman in Africatown, in Mobile, Alabama, in the last 2 years, maybe 3 years now, has created what she calls the Spirit of the Ancestors Festival, where all of the descendants are called back to Mobile, Alabama from all over the country. And it is quite an event with major keynote speakers that we'll talk about. But her position is every family of the 12 has a story to tell. So the story isn't just about one family. So in trying to get ready to program this competition, originally Vicki and I were basically going to do a competition around the design of a single museum, an Africatown museum. But when we kept meeting with the community said, well, we need many more things than just a museum. We need housing, we need expansion for the school, something needs to happen with the abandoned public housing sites. We have all of these land-based points of interest that are part of the story. So I guess for maybe the first 6 or 7 months, I was going down to Africatown on a monthly basis from Birmingham, 5-hour drive. And I would go and spend 1 week out of every month. During that time, I collected every plan I could get my hands on. The Africatown Neighborhood Revitalization Plan is a wonderful document that the people in Africatown put together so they could really have a grip on their future. We also have the Africatown Connections Blueway Project, which is a fantastic project dealing with how the estuaries and rivers, in fact, will help with the interpretation of the story. That's being led by a fantastic woman by the name of Liz Inser Smith, who for the last 3 years, has been giving technical assistance to the Africatown community. She is a director with the National Park Service, and I'm telling you, top drawer facilitator. We also have MIJAC, the Mobile Environmental Justice Action Coalition, that's run by a Native American Indian descendant who on a cross-country bicycle ride accidentally discovered Africatown. He stopped, he stayed, he lives there, and he's now one of the most progressive forces in Africatown to deal with industrial proliferation that is ensconcing this settlement, and also environmental hazards. And he is just a zoning whiz when it comes to all of the zoning challenges that have been made historically to really take industrial zoning and have it overlay existing residential uses. It's a very, very big problem. But even now we're looking at this United Development Code, City of Mobile, which is the zoning code that is very threatening to the present uses that are going on in the community. But to make a long story short, we collected and read every single piece of planning information we could get our hands on. And a lot of that information recommendations have gone into the programming of the Africatown International Design Idea competition. In addition to putting the competition together, we also decided that every time we came to Africatown, we would bring some experts with us from the architectural community. So we were able to get Bill Bates, who African-American president of AIA, 2019 president of AIA, to come down to Africatown. He spent 2 days talking about competitions. A lot of the elder descendants really appreciated that the president of AIA would come and spend time talking to them about how to revitalize their town. We also brought down Natalie Robertson. You've got to get her book, PhD from Hampton University, another HBCU in the house. She has written just an unbelievable book on the last slave ship Clotilda and the making of Africatown, USA. And then our ace in the hole is the guy in the middle right there, Michael Blakey, Dr. Michael Blakey, who is one of the leading archaeologists in this country, who has a expertise in the forensic examination of African burial grounds. If you know anything about the New York City African burial ground that was designed by Rodney Leon, beautiful architectonics there. Michael Blakey was the forensic archaeologist who was given $6 million of federal funds to dig up those bones and inspect them, label them, distinguish them, classify them, and then reinter them once the examination had happened. The story there is that the federal government build a new federal building and they accidentally bumped into these unidentified graves. So that's how we basically, that's why the archaeology of these historic sites are so very important. Philadelphia found the same thing when they were doing the new Independence Square and trying to basically rebuild the history of George Washington's first White House in Philadelphia. In digging around the edges of the foundation of George Washington's first White House in Philadelphia, lo and behold, they found out that he had slaves in the basement. So community activists stopped the construction and restoration of that particular facility while archaeologists came in, and then the story was told about the first president of our nation having been a slaveholder right there at the first White House. So civic engagement is important. We brought Michael Blakey down to the archaeologist down to Africatown. He spent 2 days there. We are very fortunate to have him interested in what is going on in Africatown because he also co-authored this unbelievable treatise, which is called Engaging Descendant Communities in the Interpretation of Slave Sites, Museums, and Memorials. So Blakey also helped to start the Black Archaeological Society. At one time, he was head of the archaeology department at Howard University, and now he is embedded at William and Mary College. This treatise, Engaging Descendant Communities, is going to be the backbone. We refer to it as the rubric. It is the only time in American history that rules for how, in fact, descendant communities should be engaged has been classified and also wrapped with criteria that will help curators and others to literally score the extent to which the engagement occurs. In other words, a phone call is not going to do it. These are the rules and regulations of engagement. And you have to just pull it up. It's a PDF, go online and pull it up. In addition to bringing Michael Blakey and Natalie to the table, we also, as part of our civic engagement exercise for the competition, we brought in Wayne Coleman, head of archives at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, because we found that a lot of the Clotilda descendants had quite a few artifacts that they had been hiding in their attics and under their beds, just to make sure that nobody came and stole their stuff, stole their history. So Wayne Coleman came and gave a presentation at the Mobile Public Library, and he's going to come back to Africatown to help the descendants figure out how to classify and also ensure those belongings, some known and some unknown belongings. We also have at our disposal Natalie, I call her Natalie O, Nigerian sister who, in addition to being a NOMA member, she also is CEO of Southern Sahara. But she has been running design competitions in Africa now for the last, I'd say, 5-6 years. She comes to NOMA conferences, and she is literally the liaison that lets us know what our African counterparts are building continent-wide. She's going to be one of our jurors. We also have tapped into Jack Pyburn, who I've worked with a number of times. He is one of the greatest historic preservationists that we have literally in this country. He comes from Lord Ike Sargent in Atlanta and has been very good at making recommendations. We've tapped back into our old buddy, Richard Dozier, who used to be Dean of Architecture at Tuskegee. And he's basically known, Dick Dozier, for writing opus and many, many articles on the contributions that Africans have made to American architecture. And then at the top, we have Psyche Mafondikwa, who is a typographer who has written a book on 136 systems of the African alphabet, as we try to put this history together. Because we've always been told that our history is, oh, it's just an oral history. Oh, it's that and a bag of chips. So we're collecting information. The other thing that Vicki Howell and I did in order to put the competition together, these are the 20 organizations that we've met with over the last 2 or 3 years. These were not elevator conversations. These were sit-down meetings trying to get an understanding of where the city of Mobile is on Africatown, the Alabama Historical Commission. We spent a lot of time with the National Park Service and the Blueways. We also have tapped into the Smithsonian for very good cause. The archaeologists who are responsible for having found the ship come out of the Smithsonian Slave Wrecks Project team. And that team goes around the world specifically looking for and at slave wrecks. They are co-teamed with GW, George Washington University, and its Maritime Archaeology Department. So we have the Smithsonian, we've got the GW Marine Archaeology Department that then is joined by the Black Scuba Divers Association. So it's that three-legged stool that was responsible for the discovery of the Clotilda. Originally, it was thought to have been spotted by a journalist in Mobile, Alabama, by the name of Ben Raines, whose father, in fact, used to be the editor-in-chief of the New York Times. So this is how the story also began to get traction. But there have been a lot of false starts in terms of actually looking for the ship and finding the correct ship, because when they finally went down to the Mobile Bay, they saw a shipwreck graveyard down there. And initially what was thought to have been the Clotilda actually was not. At the top, we have the community groups that we've worked with and talked to. The Africatown Community Development Corporation. We've got CHESS, which is run by Joe Womack. We've got the Mobile County Training School Alumni Association, which is run by Anderson Flynn. We'll get back to him later. He's doing some fantastic things and having started an umbrella community organization, which is called the Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation, so everyone can move in the same direction. And we also have reached out and tapped the Benin Society of Architects. In fact, Vicky Howell went to Benin specifically to speak to the Benin Society of Architects and their interest in working with us on this competition, because it is a bi-continental story. The story of Africatown isn't just local to Mobile, Alabama. Our political champion has been the mayor of the city of Pritchard. We'll get back to that in a minute. We also had great support from former Senator Doug Jones in the US Senate, but we've talked to everyone. And then one of the great political champions for Africatown of all time is Merceria Ludgood, who is an African-American lawyer who has been on the Mobile County Commission for quite some time and has been very instrumental in bringing political forces to bear in this story. Africatown, Mobile, Alabama is not the only Africatown, so let's not get it confused. There's another Africatown in Seattle, Washington, that's run by a young man named Wyking Garrett, whose grandfather founded Africatown in Seattle. Very active this young man is, and every year he gives an Africatown Design Week in Seattle. I was invited as keynote speaker, and they have gone about the business of creating a community land trust to make sure that their community has complete control over housing, historic preservation, to make sure that unnecessary demolitions do not happen, and to make sure that the story does not get swept away of Africans who literally built their own facilities. So what are the main issues? Well, one of the reasons that we're here is because all of these bullet points were happening all at the same time. It's like an unbelievable convergence of constellations. We had the discovery of the boat through the Slave Wreckage Project. In 2019, we were celebrating 400 years, or memorializing, I should say, 400 years of American slavery. Zora Neale Hurston's book, and if you don't have it, write it down, go get it. It will bring tears to your eyes. Barracoon was published in 2018. The community had their first Spirit of the Ancestors Festival. United Nations was jumpstarting its Sites of Memory. Henry Louis Gates discovered that Questlove of the Roots, in fact, was related to people from Africatown. Ghana was celebrating its decade of the African diaspora, where it did a shout out, and it will continue to do so until 2024, that anyone who is born of African blood in America or throughout the diaspora should come to Ghana and buy some land. The president has announced that, so get on that right away. We also had the blessing of the 2019 president of AIA being an African-American. Noma magazine published an issue on Afrofuturism, which really dealt with Black communities, cultural identity, and self-determination, all tied back to that wonderful movie, Black Panther, and the notion of Wakanda as utopia. Well, that was going on in 2018. The Smithsonian had its lecture series on Whitney Young, activism and Black architects. The Dean of Architecture at Tuskegee, Dr. Carla Jackson Bell, published her book on the role of culture in the design studio. The university started its Global Africa Lab. Common, the hip hop artist, bought the rights to the Barracoon book that Zora Neale Hurston wrote to turn into a TV series. Terry Griffin was running the Just City at Harvard, GSD. Tuskegee is now going to be the first school to offer a joint degree program in architecture and African American studies. And of course, Dr. Kwesi Daniels is just going to be all over that PhD. And then we had the Black Panther movie with the visions of Wakanda and Utopia. We put all this together and said, how come Africatown is not a model? Perfect place, perfect time. So the competitions have to deal with preservation, cultural identity, cultural heritage, creative placemaking, environmental protection, public and private heritage agendas, cultural tourism, economic development, and African architecture, all for this one underserved community. So what's in it for the community? The real question, I won't go through all of the bullets here, but the real question really had to do with how to leverage the discovery of the slave ship in such a way that any revenue generated from tourism would come back to fix this broken community, this blighted community, this community under siege with community activists who have tried their darndest generation to generation to keep it glued together with very little capital improvement input coming from the political powers that be. Here's a picture of the cemetery, historic cemetery, that was started by the Africans in the 1860s, 1872. So how did we go about the business of organizing the competition? Well, there are a number of things that we knew. It wasn't going to be a competition just about a single building, a single Africatown museum. The community straightened us out on that piece of business quite quickly, I should say. So we had to listen to many voices. I love the term multivocality because it means listening to voices other than your own. That's a big hint, write that down. So the competition is really about cultural identity and who gets to tell the story. At the end of the day, that one building turned into 4 sites and 16 venues. And then we went about the business of identifying 16 jurors. Half of them would be architects and historians, and the other half of the design jury who would judge the competition would be descendants and community activists. So it would be a really cool balancing act. One of the things that we decided to do is that everybody who was tapped as a juror would also contribute an essay to what we call the competition book. And in the competition book, this is the prototype. When you register for the competition, you would also purchase a book, a coffee table book, that would tell you the history of Africatown, why a competition, who was Cudjoe Lewis, was Africatown actually a real town built by real Black people? Surprise, surprise. And is this time for a new look at in-town, new town building? Why now? Why Benin? Why Wakanda? Why Afrocentricity? Why equitable development? So this book actually becomes the philosophical foundation for the launch of the competition. The jurors will help to write the design book, the essays, and also community quotes. So it's really cool. When you register for the competition, you'll already have an idea of the philosophical underpinnings of the people who will be judging your work. And that's good to know. The competition jury, of course, any competition is only as good as its jury. And we're going to have some young folks on the jury too, but we're very pleased to announce that Jack Travis, FAIA, also NOMAC, architect, is going to be our jury chair. He is the author of the seminal book, African American Architects in Current Practice. He is confirmed, and his focus is on African architecture and aesthetics, as well as the programming of architectonic spaces that are influenced by architectural history out of Africa. These are our other jurors. The pictures are so small, but all of them are like total rock stars. Half are architects and the other half are community leaders. We have David Hughes, who's going to join us from Kent State. He's written the design primer on African architecture. Mike Blakey, of course, is going to be on board. Natalie O from Nigeria, who has done so many African competitions, on and on and on. All this will be on our website too, so you'll be able to revisit the essays. So the competition and how it works has everything to do with, first of all, understanding how we as designers really understand what went on with the slave trade. And the way that we have this discussion, I hope this will pop up. I wonder if it will. Whoops. Yeah, you need to see this. This is going to be on the competition website, because when we talk about the international slave trade, maybe we'll imagine a boat or two, a couple of boats brought a couple of people over, you know, folks got together, made a whole bunch of Black folks. But quite frankly, this video, these are the years at the top, and the dots that you see flying across the page are literal slave ships that were transporting Africans, more than 12 million, from the continent over to, quote unquote, the New World. And if you notice, most of the ships in the slave ships in the 1600s were going predominantly to Brazil. And in fact, 75% of all enslaved Africans were taken to Brazil. The rest were kind of sorted out between North America and the Caribbean islands. And so if you keep looking at the years, this is when the slave trade was its heaviest. And I hope there's one thing that you recognize, that's a whole bunch of highway traffic. They estimate that on each one of those dotted flying marbles, ships, clippers, there were probably 100 to 200 Africans that were on each ship. So I always say that the first math problem that any kid should get in third grade is, how many ships does it take over 400 years to transport 12 million Africans against their will? So when people of dominant cultures say to people of color, why don't you just get over it? I'm not sure they're clearly understanding the level of blood memory that we as African people have about what happened to us. I mean, I remember when I first saw this slideshow, if you notice in 1808, that's when the international slave trade became illegal coming to the United States. Watch and look and see what happens around 1860, which is when the Clotilda Africans were brought across the river, across the ocean. You can see that the number of dots is slowing down, slowing down, slowing down. Whoops. Hey, that was the last slave ship. So that's the other reason why it's important to American history. So we want to make sure for the competition that before you start designing anything for the descendants of this one ship, you'll understand the historic context in which slavery, in fact, was conducted. Then we want to also talk about when you begin as a designer to design a series of buildings, the question is, what's the story? And from whose point of view will you be telling the story? So I put this slide together to talk about the voices of the slave trade. You've got the American slaveholders, their side of the story. You've got the chiefs in Benin and Africa that were literally selling some of those Africans into slavery. That's a story. Then you have the story of the Africans in America who were enslaved and who also reached emancipation. Then you have the story of their descendants. Let's not leave out the story of the plantation owners. And then we're going to go all the way back to take a look at the ship, because the ship and the shipbuilding industry and the insurance that went along with the transport of this cargo is also a part of the story. The other part of the story is, before you can truly appreciate the fact that these Africans built their own town, it's not a bad idea to begin to look at the plantation economy just in Alabama and look at the role that enslaved Africans played on the building not only of the plantation economy, but also the building of the plantation houses. So this notion that Black folk, all we could do was come and pick cotton, we built the entire industry that surrounded the plantation economy. Free work, a whole bunch of free labor for 400 years. Gets you a lot of, money in the bank. So with this unpaid labor, these are just some of the plantation homes that were built in Alabama. These are just the ones that are on the National Trust list. So the question was, well, who built these plantation homes and what is the story? What we have found is that a number of plantation homes were often built by enslaved Africans. This is what they built for the slave master. Africans were also utilized to build furniture that went into the houses, all right? And that's useful to know. So that's what was built for the slave owners. And then on top of that, guess what? The enslaved Africans also had to build their own slave huts and slave housing on the plantation for themselves. So one of the big resources that I use and that will be part of the website, because we're going to have a major historic resource navigation button. But this book you really have to get. It's called Back of the Big House, The Architecture of Plantation Slavery, by a colleague of mine who also went to the Architectural Association in London. And Paul Oliver was his mentor as well. We did not meet at the AA. I met John Michael Vlatch years, almost decades after I'd finished the AA. He is probably retired now, but he was the head of the folk life department at George Washington University. And this book, Back of the Big House, basically traces the history of plantation architecture that was built by enslaved people. It's a remarkable piece of research work. So now that we look at what we're capable of building, before you design any of the buildings that are part of the competition, the other thing that's very important is how do we as, Black architects see ourselves? How do people who are not Black see enslaved people? And so one of the things that we decided that we would do is we would really try to go into the interior lives of the Africans that were part of the Clotilda shipmates. And one of the most interesting characters that is revealed is of Cudjoe Lewis. Cudjoe Lewis was one of the co-founders of Africatown, and he lived to be almost 100 years old. He got off of the slave ship in 1860, and he died in 1935, which means that this man had his feet during his lifetime on 2 continents. He had his feet also in 2 centuries and also in 2 cultures. What's fascinating about Cudjoe Lewis is he is one of the only Africans that was ever interviewed who had a memory about what life was like before being enslaved and then after being brought here and also emancipated. Zora Neale Hurston wrote that story. Zora Neale Hurston in 1927 came to Mobile, Alabama to interview this man. And so it's from her interviews and from also her photographs that we can get a first account of how these Africans organized themselves, how they bought the land, how they cut the wood, how they built the homes, and also how they built the community. One of the things that we have done, aside from putting the competition together, because a lot of folks are saying, well, when's the competition going to happen? What are you guys working on? Well, in the meantime, we wrote a grant to the Alabama Historical Commission, and we got funded. What we wanted to know was, would it be possible to take the photographs and words of Zora Neale Hurston through her interviews of Cudjoe Lewis in 1927 and use those words and photographs to basically create blueprints of this house that has since been demolished? You have to wait for the answer. All right, so here's some more Zora Neale Hurston photographs. The home of Cudjoe Lewis at the well. Cudjoe Lewis with his 2 twin granddaughters. Now remember, at the beginning of my lecture, I have 2 twin grandsons. One of the things that's really quite provocative about Cudjoe Lewis and these 2 twin granddaughters is that he came from what we now call Nigeria. Nigerians are known for making more twins, 50% more twins than any other ethnic group in the world. So it's very fascinating that we have an opportunity to see Cudjoe Lewis, you know, in this twinning concept in more ways than one. The two continents, the 2 centuries, and now the 2 little girls. It's quite something. This is the house that Cudjoe Lewis built for himself. One of the things that I want you to notice in the previous photograph is that the house that Cudjoe built for himself had wood floors. This is not a peanut shell floor or a mud floor. He had wood floors. We'll come back to that later. So one has to know the story of these people before you start building community or regenerating community around them. Here are photographs of the freed slaves of Africatown. Here are some photographs of Africatown descendants who were dressed by their plantation owners. And here, this last picture, this is a picture of the Dahomey Amazons that were responsible for capturing a number of the Africans that got placed in captivity during civil wars in Africa. So who were these enslaved Africans? One of the things that you have really got to have a deep respect for before even entering the realm of the design competition is knowing who we're talking about. The people of Benin and from that area of West Africa, this first etching up here was done in the 16th century by Portuguese, drawing pictures and etchings of what in fact Benin looked like at that time. Down here, the second picture is about the magnificent walls of Benin, known for being a gated city. So we're talking about a very well-organized, very sophisticated African culture who was also responsible for making these beautiful masks out of ivory and also what are known as the Benin bronzes. This stuff was going on in the 15th century, all right? And this is one of the quotes I love by Natalie O, our sister planner, African competition guru. Africatown was built by the hands of Africans who came to the Americas with thousands of years of science embedded in their DNA. Not only the science of tilling the soil for nutrients for our bodies, but scientific knowledge of shaping the soil into architectural monuments. Fact or fiction? Quiz? Okay. So in terms of, before you can even approach the competition, we're trying to separate fact from fiction. What do you know about Africa before you start even getting engaged in the regeneration of Africatown? Well, on the right, we have the photograph of the female African warriors that were in the Black Panther movie. That really was not totally fictional because those particular women in the film were based on the Dahomey Amazons that were responsible for a lot of the capture of the Africans that were taken down to Ouida to the coast to be enslaved. That's good to know. Didn't know that. Also, the costumes were done by Ruth Carter, the first Black woman to ever get an Oscar for costume design, who happens to be the first cousin of Robert Easter, who was the Dean of Architecture at Hampton University. I guess fashion design runs in the family, huh? Okay, fact or fiction? So when we're talking about the Black Panther movie, we also need to, and this notion of Wakanda, of utopia, and who are the superheroes. In the Black community, when you say Black Panther, depending on your age, you may think of the cartoon character from Marvel, or you might think of our other superheroes, the Black Panthers, Oakland, California, who were non-fictional heroes, and the Black Panther Party organization, which also had a lot to do with anti-police brutality and the building of Black communities in the 1960s. Fact or fiction? On the left-hand side, this is the mythological map of Wakanda by Marvel Comics. On the right, I put together a map of African empires prior to 1500 for Christ. So usually when you talk about African empires, people say, oh yeah, Egypt. Yeah, Egypt. It wasn't only Egypt. The Africans had Ghana, Mali, Kanin, Yoruba, Benin, Songhai, Bashwaze, Zimbabwe, Carthagena, Persian, Fatimid, and Umayyad empires on the African continent. So this notion about whether Africans can build anything, you must come to the competition understanding that Africans are builders, not just cotton pickers, as we have been told through our American history. The other thing that becomes very important in the competition has to do with how do we see ourselves as African people, and how do others see us? Are we seen as the other? Are we seen as people of conscience and talent and beauty, or not? So the competition is not just about architecture. The competition is not just about architecture. It's about values of beauty and also blood memory. It's about oral history. It's about intellectual property. It's also about the narrative. So we're going to tell everybody who even comes to the competition, you might as well just go on right now and buy the Zora Neale Hurston book, Barracoon. And by all means, read the introduction by Dr. Deborah Plant, magnificent scholar, independent scholar in Florida, who was given the responsibility of taking these notes from 1927 and editing them into Barracoon, the book where she interviewed Cudjoe Lewis. Barracoon is a Portuguese word, which basically means barricade, because at the edge of the African continent, where the land met the ocean, the Portuguese and all the other enslavers basically set up these barracoons. See the middle picture, that's a barricade. That was the place where the slaves who were driven to the shore were enslaved, classified, categorized before they got on the ships. And here in Zanzibar, here is a piece of public art that also demonstrates what the life of an African enslaved person was like in such a barricade. So then the other thing we ask ourselves, well, is there any such thing as African architecture or African influences on architecture? I mean, like, really? Well, one of our heroes, speaking of fact and fiction, one of our non-fictional heroes is the great late Max Bond, who was always one of my professors at Columbia, but he always was telling Black architects to look again, reach back, and recognize your neglected history. And AIA New York, run by a whole bunch of other fantastic NY COBA NOMA members, every year they give the J. Max Bond Memorial Lecture. And I forget what year this was, 2018, I was one of the keynotes for the Max Bond Lecture. And the title was Attaining Wakandan Utopia, Representation, Placemaking, and the Diaspora. So we're just letting you know that while we're having conversations about the Clotilda, the boat, and what happens to the community, the African American architectural community as a group of professionals are also asking questions about the role of architecture and cultural identity when it comes to community building. Here are some of Max's work. I get very teary-eyed when I see the Bolgatanga Library, because when I was at the Architectural Association and doing that research on 101 ways to build housing out of mud, I landed in Bolgatanga in 120 degrees in the shade, had my little transistor radio, 120 degrees in the shade. This building looked like a mirage in the desert to me. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was shelter because I was up there taking pictures of mud buildings. And I go into this building and my clothes start blowing. And I'm like, well, you all have air conditioning up here? They're like, nope. Fans? Nope. I said, well, why is it so cool in here? They said because whoever designed the building took advantage of windstream and created the walls to basically perform as a vortex that sucked the wind current into the building, thus keeping it cool. I said, well, who built the building? We don't know. 5 years later, I'm at Columbia at orientation and graduate school, and here is Max Bond giving the orientation lecture, and he shows this slide of his library in Bolgatanga. I had met his building before I met Max. Now, the reason that Max got that commission was because Kwame Nkrumah, another superhero, the first president of independent Ghana, decided that when he became president of the first African independent nation, all of the civic buildings under his administration would be built by a Black man. And Max Bond was commissioned to do the public civic design mantra for Kwame Nkrumah. So how do we see ourselves? We're nation builders. Jack Travis, can't say enough about Jack. This competition is not just about architectural history. It's also about Afrofuturism. And if you know anything about Jack Travis, Jack has generated over the course of his unbelievable academic career, I think he teaches at 5 design schools in New York simultaneously. Jack has basically created a rubric of African design principles and has created a plethora of models that are in now plexiglass boxes. They're almost museum pieces, hundreds of them, of how African generated patterns, form, color, massing can literally begin to create a new kind of architectonic language that we as African American architects and Africans in the diaspora can begin to rely on as being principles and rules of aesthetics, principles and rules of materiality, principles and rules of material culture, as well as structural form. So Jack, don't forget, is going to be the jury chair for the competition. Yay, Jack. Okay, so this is how we've organized the competition. Originally, it was just going to be one building. We said, no, we need 16 things. We need a whole bunch of stuff. So what we did was we divided all of the community's wishes into basically 4 sites. Each of the 4 sites, if you register for the competition, you can decide you want to do historic Africatown, or you can do the Josephine Allen public housing site, or you can do the Blue Ways site, or you can do the Africatown Park, USA, or you can do all of them. Each time you register, however, you pay $100 through the competition website. If you select site number 1, you download all 4 buildings and you have to design all 4 buildings. We suggest that you put a team together of at least 4 people that are multicultural and that are also multidisciplinary, all right? And we did this so that at the end of the day, if you pick just one site, what you give back in terms of your submission is an ensemble of buildings and not just a single standalone building. It's the ensemble that becomes important here. And this is how they all connect geographically. We realize that when we take all 4 sites, historic Africatown, the Josephine Allen site, the Blue Ways site with the 15 points of interest, and also the Africatown Park, if we connect all of those, and they can all be connected by both land and water, they collectively tell the history of Africatown. The history of Africatown is bigger than just the historic districts. This Africatown Cultural Mile, which is really the endpoint, the major deliverable of the competition, is literally a 10-mile stretch that dovetails very neatly into what, in fact, an economic engine that rests on cultural heritage tourism could become. So we aren't just talking about a walking tour of historic Africatown. We're now talking about getting the descendants of Africatown thoroughly involved in the interpretation of their story and the revenue that can be generated from this user immersive experience. Here it is again. This is how the story is organized for the competition. 4 sites, 4 venues each, at each site, 16 venues. And that Africatown Cultural Mile basically goes through Mobile, Chickasaw, and Pritchard together create the Africatown Cultural Mile. Okay, so we are still working on the website, but this is how it will work. Each of the 4 sites will literally have a video that gives you an indication of thematically what kind of environment you're about to enter. When you enter the site number 4, for example, that's the Africatown Park, USA. There'll be a video that gives you a sweep through this jungle-like terrain. When you go to the Blue Wave site, if you select the Blue Wave site, you'll see bubbling water along the edge, just getting you started thematically for the kind of architectonic response. And this notion of the Africatown Cultural Mile, we're asking you to basically think about the design of the urban experience. These are typical cities, and these are typical walking tours for typical cities. So the idea of having an Africatown Cultural Mile is not in any way different than a city that basically tells you to walk the promenade or the Ramblas in Barcelona. It's all in how you organize it. These are how the sites would be designed. We've already started developing design criteria. Designers can select anywhere from 1 to 4 sites. They have to identify African design traditions in architecture and community building that can be applied. They have to try to employ African design principles to generate new architectural paradigms in a preservation district. And they also have to propose some kind of new Afrocentric design option. All right, windows, doors, porches, steps, we don't know, it's up to you. These are the maps that we're generating. This is a map of site 1 in the green top right-hand side, historic district. There's a cemetery right beside it. And then the Joe Allen site, the public housing site, is beneath it. Here it is again. In the competition, we'll give you multiple views, in fact, of each of these sites so you can begin to decide what you're gonna do for your 4 ensembles of buildings. But for each site, we're gonna give you enough information so that you'll know the land and learn the culture. If you select the historic district, we're gonna basically give you everything you need to know about the historic district when it was registered in 2012. All this information will be at your disposal before you go about the design of the buildings. We already know what the classifications are of the existing buildings in Africatown. And as you can see, these are the buildings that are standing there now. This community is a much blighted, much underserved community that really needs the intellect and the spiritual profoundness of architects globally to regenerate this into a World Heritage Site. Historic Africatown, once again, there's the Cudjoe Lewis House. We'll get back to that in a minute. Historic Africatown, this was the first welcome center in Africatown, which was a double-wide trailer. Community put it together themselves, and Katrina came and blew it away. Here's a cemetery, the Historic Africatown Cemetery, that was built by the Africans as soon as they built land. They built 3 things: a cemetery, a church, a school, and then their housing. This is a bust of Cudjoe Lewis. Now, what we're saying is, if you in the competition are called upon to design a welcome center at the cemetery, then why not reach back into best practices such as the New York City African burial ground? Similar stories. Blakey was there, the archaeologist was there who inspected the bones of those interred slaves. What lessons can be learned from the design of this memorial, monument, and interpretive site? When it comes to Historic Africatown, aside from the welcome house, you also have to design 30 prototype infill houses. What will they look like? What's the level of affordability? These are some of the things that are being done by the Rural Studio, their 20K house in Auburn. But at any rate, for each of the sites, I've worked out a matrix of the 4 buildings you have to design, thematically what needs to be done, the building type we're looking for, the number of acres or blocks, and then the basic square footage for each of those projects. We are not interested in toilet detail. boathouse. This really has to do with a design concept competition. This is the second site, the Josephine Allen site. It's in a horrible floodplain. So for the competition, we said, okay, let's flood the floodplain on purpose. And we'll put a boathouse for a replica of the Clotilda right there in the automatically flooded floodplain. We'll use the water as our friend and build a boathouse there. There's a precedent for it. World travel takes you far. These are some of my photographs from Giza at the base of the pyramids in Cairo, where they actually found the funeral barge of the pharaoh, and they built a boathouse for it right there, right there. So we know that we do have this notion of boathouses as museums. And the reason we're looking at the Joe Allen site for that thought is because of all of the sites, it has the largest acreage. It's 60 acres. We're also saying on the Josephine Allen site, where there used to be almost 300 units of public housing projects, Happy Hills, we said for the competition, we want you to design maritime residential housing for the elders and also mixed income. And because it is in a floodplain, we want you, after you construct a full-size replica of the Clotilda, we want you to find some very clever ways of taking us underwater to see what was going on in the ship. And we're looking at some of, very interesting things that have been done in terms of underwater public sculpture in terms of archaeology. You can also go and look at what they're doing in Alexandria, Egypt for their underwater museum in this case. Okay, and so here's the matrix of things that would be expected. The third site is basically, was given to us by the National Park Service and the people who have worked so closely with Liz Smith-Inser, and Chess and Joe Womack and Anderson Flynn and Ramsey Sprague, those guys, they've been working for 2 years to identify the 15 points of interest along the waterbeds there. So we're saying, my God, for the competition, you'll have to, these are the 4 buildings, an Africatown Yacht Club, tongue in cheek, because we know the Africans did not come over here on a yacht. But the Africatown Yacht Club becomes a place where young people learn to swim and where they learn to build their own wooden sailboats to either sell or sail along the waterbed. They can generate revenue. We're also looking at a series of 30 pavilions. It should be 15 pavilions along the water edge. You'd also have to design a fleet of well-branded tourist boats to take you pavilion to pavilion. And you'd also have to design a gateway. And these are some of the ideas that we use for the yacht club, hanging right, very much close to the river's edge. We also know that because of the work of Anderson Flynn and the Mobile County Training School, they've already tapped into the Black Scuba Divers Association. And last summer, with input from Vivian Figures, who is a state legislator in Mobile, they raised enough money for the Mobile County Training School to start the Africatown swim team. And so the promise is that these Black scuba divers who are still digging up the boat and examining it underwater, the deal is they will teach these Africatown kids how to swim. And after they learn to swim, they will train them to become certified scuba divers so they also can go underwater to see what these water archaeologists are looking at. It's such a cool thing. And then there's the program for that site. The fourth and last site is the Africatown Park USA. It's about 150 acres of land in Pritchard that was set aside by the Alabama legislature, I want to say 30 years ago, started by Michael Figures. And then there were 2 other gladiators, legislative gladiators who worked with him to make sure the state set this land aside. So we're saying, well, what would go in this park? We're looking at a new Benin house, a museum of the African diaspora in the park, because this is a place where the Africans tell their side of the story of what happened in slavery. And so we're saying the Benin House Project, a wellness spa, hotel, and convention center. We're looking at a genealogy center and workforce development, and then an Africatown Park gateway. Here at the bottom are all, the country of Benin is getting ready to build 5 museums dedicated to slavery at each of the towns from the interior to the water edge that were responsible for Clotilda, as well as others. So we're going to have a dialogue intercontinental about what happens in the Africatown Park. The mayor of Pritchard has already invited us to meet with the delegates of Benin. And it's just a really cool, project. So here for the Africatown Park, the competition program that I wrote, basically, wouldn't it be really cool if you could design exhibition spaces in the park that almost look like an enchanted forest of exhibition cubes that were big enough to hold life-size Benin bronze sculptures. And as you're walking through the park, you're accidentally bumping into this new discovery of the architecture and art of that empire. That's the what if. What if Jimmy Gardner, the mayor of Pritchard, were to tell us on his talks with the country of Benin about what in fact he discovered when he went to Benin to have these kinds of conversations. He could actually lead some of the walking tours. The country of Benin has had a relationship with the city of Pritchard and Mobile now for the past 30 years. They have done their apology for the enslavement. They have done libation ceremonies. It's really a very interesting history. And of course, before you start designing anything from Africatown, you need to know what Black architects have also been designing when it comes to our own interpretive sites. This, of course, is the new Black Museum on the Mall, the Smithsonian National Museum of African History and Culture, programs planned by Max Bond and Phil Freelon, later added Sir David Ajayi. That was a dream team. These are Phil Freelon's museums. Phil Freelon passed, but before Phil Freelon passed, he, more than any other Black architect, had designed more museums in this country than anybody else. So you need to look him up. This is another one of Phil Freelon's museums, aside from the one in Charlotte. He also did the new Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. And then look this up. The Caribbean Center on the Expression of Memory of Slavery and the Slave Trade. This is the largest slavery museum in the world. Look it up. We're also going to bring to the fore the other slavery museums that have been built worldwide. You might want to take a look at the Slavery Museum in Liverpool, England. Why Liverpool? Beatles are from there, but why Liverpool? Liverpool, because Liverpool built more slave ships than any other seaport. And they have a museum that basically talks about the role that the ship and shipbuilding played in the transporting of this illegal cargo. Before you come to build for Africatown, you also need to be aware what Africans are building for themselves architecturally that speaks to cultural identity. This is the National Museum in Senegal, which is a colossus of an African family, and the museum is inside of the statue. Bigger than our Statue of Liberty, I must say, all right? And so that's kind of site number 4, some of the things that could happen with respect to the building of the African Museum in the park. The other thing that we found out accidentally is as we were putting these 4 sites and 16 venues together, oh my God, guess what? We accidentally discovered that all 16 sites are on publicly owned land. So while this is a design idea competition, if the community and the powers that be so decided, once the submission for the competition as answers and solutions come in, some of the stuff could actually be built. And Africatown Cultural Mile could literally be created if there is a common will. So implementation, anyone? Well, before you can implement anything, and this is why we call it a design idea competition, you have to have a great vision, check. Competition will bring that to the table. You have to have site control. We have no site control. You need to have political champions. Who's going to stand up for this ideal? A coordinated community consensus. That's what the new Africatown Heritage Preservation Foundation is going to do, this new umbrella organization. Master planners, architects, willing landowners, developers, appropriate zoning, we'll talk about that later, and then a series of financial incentives to actually make the thing happen. Public-private partnership. So when people say, are you gonna build it? I say, let's just go down the checklist, okay? Because until you have these dots or boxes checked, the answer is you won't be building anything, all right? So that is another layer for consideration for community. Now we know that activism can be engendered from great ideas. This is my competition submission for the Grand Egyptian Museum. I did not win. I thought it was the greatest solution in the world. I did not win, but this one did. I think he copied off my paper. No, it's great minds think alike. The winning entry for this competition is actually building the new Egyptian Museum at the base of the pyramids in Giza, and it will hold the entire holdings of the Cairo Museum, including the entire King Tut collection. It's going to be unbelievable and majorly underground, so it does not interfere with the view to the pyramids. So this idea of the competition is a utopian idea. And we got some of the ideas about Wakanda and Afrofuturism from the movie Black Panther, but of course, this is not the scale of Africatown, all right? This Wakanda was at a mega scale. You have to design things that are going to be in scale with the community. So we began to look at other set design modules. We probably could do something like this at a neighborhood scale, perhaps, you know, for some of the more iconic buildings, but you also have to pay attention to the historic preservation rules. But at any rate, that's what the competition is about. In many ways, the Africatown International Design Idea Competition is a love letter to Africa, a love letter to Africa. And by the way, we've started branding everything. We've branded the stationery that we're using to invite the jurors, to get donors involved, to get sponsors involved. This is the competition schedule. Soft launch is like now. You can go to the website as a place saver, but the official hard launch is not going to happen until Juneteenth 2021. That's when the registration will open, and you literally will have a year to work on the competition. Why? Because we know schools of architecture, if you put this in design studio, this can become a first semester project or a second semester project. We have so many options of what can be designed that it also can take place in vertical studio. From first to fifth year, everybody can find something worthy of designing that also is in concert with the accreditation board criteria. So this is what we've been doing. What the heck have you guys been doing? You've been talking about this competition now for 2 years. Well, in addition to programming the competition, we also, StudioRotan with Move, these are other contributions that we've made to the community. We did get the grant from the Alabama Historical Commission to take the words of Zora Neale Hurston and generate the plans. We actually have the plans. But the research we're packaging now, it's going to become a 112-page book, all right? We aren't just talking about Cudjoe Lewis and Zora Neale Hurston. We're also talking about a lot of the history of Africans in architecture before you get to the blueprints at the back of the book. This entire report will be handed to, of course, the Alabama Historical Commission as our final report, but we're also going to give it to the community because we realize that now that they have the blueprints for an original house, it could be reconstructed. It could become a memorial to Cudjoe Lewis and the Clotilda descendants. It could become a new affordable housing center for the community. It could become a small house museum where people come to learn how Africatown itself was put together. The Heritage House that's now being built to contain some of the artifacts from the Clotilda The main thrust of that particular building, groundbreaking happened maybe a week ago, is the Clotilda discovery and artifacts from the Clotilda. The idea of the Cudjoe Lewis house is that this is where you come to find out how the heck the Africans actually built the village. That's one of the ideas. So that's going to be basically handed over to the Heritage Preservation Foundation. In addition to that, while working on the competition, Vicki Howell and I also went after an American Roundtable initiative that was sponsored by the Architectural League of New York. They did a call for papers nationally from cities, communities, and settlements that wanted to concentrate case studies on rural poverty. We submitted for Africatown, and we became one of the 10 settlements, in fact, that got awarded. We're finishing that work right now. And let me tell you, we're going to hand that over to the community as well, because this is a quantitative report with predetermined topics that were issued by the Architectural League of New York. If you don't know who they are, look them up. Fantastic program. They're like a national urban policy think tank of thought leaders in design and community development. Their programming is off the chart. But they gave all 10 cities 5 predetermined topics for examination: public health, public space, infrastructure, environment, and work and economy. And when we got to that work and economy chapter about alleviating rural poverty, we were hell-bent on the role that cultural tourism can play. If the cards are aligned well, there needs to be an economic development plan for Africatown. So we've turned this case study into a set of unbelievable recommendations about how to make the history of this place a stable for its own revitalization. Okay, so now we're almost at the end. I think this is the last slide. What we want you to do is keep an eye out for June 19th, 2021. Here is the website for the competition. Very simple, africatowndesign.com. Here are our sponsors and our supporters. The Africatown Heritage Foundation, Chess, who is our partner for the Cudjoe Lewis house. We got seed money from AIA. We got seed money from National Organization of Minority Architects. We got seed money from Visit Mobile. We got seed money from the previous mayor of Mobile, Dow Family Foundation, Michael Dow. We have support from the City of Pritchard, support from the 110 Clotildas Association, and then one of the older organizations in Africatown is also supporting us, the Africatown Community Development Corporation. And I think that's the end of the show. That's it. Did I do it on time?
You did great, Renee.
Did I go over time?
No, you're fine. You're fine. And on behalf of everybody here on this call, I just want to say, wow. Because I know that's what everybody is thinking. Thank you so much. And this is like my least favorite part is coming behind you in any conversation. So, but what a great lesson in Black history and on the African diaspora. You know, this competition, like you said, is truly a heartfelt love letter. And I'm just actually coming down from all the roller coaster of emotions that you took us all on your presentation. And while you've been speaking, your friends Vicki Howell and Namadali O are here, and then we've been chatting over here in the chat box. But this has been great, and we thank you so much for just gracing us with your presence and with your depth of knowledge. And I told y'all about the notebooks. I hope you had them before. So, but I did want to open it up for any questions that people. I've been kind of looking in the chat, and all everybody has to say is wow. So fantastic, and thank you. But I did want to open it up. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat so that we can answer those. If you have any questions about the competition. I will give you this bit of information about the competition. If you plan to enter, make no small plans. I saw that several times in your presentation.
You're now an official member of the promotion and marketing team, okay? And we do want everyone to promote the heck out of this, I'm telling you. Really? It's such a cool thing. As a competition competitor myself, I'm sorry I can't enter the competition. You know what I mean? It should be so much fun.
You and your team have done a wonderful job at packaging this and making it comprehensive and just, and just blessing us with the information. I mean, I feel better just as a person, just listening to this presentation and looking at how, Black people are seen, how people see us and all that. So it's really been great.
Thank you.
I guess while we still have time, I'm gonna hand it over since I don't see any questions in the chat. Phenomenal presentation. I'm excited to learn more. Got some book, amazing, Renee. Just going through some of these comments, but it's really been a great presentation.
Let me say a couple of things here. I'm seeing a couple of questions pop up. This competition is going to be open to everybody. It's open to students, it's open to professionals, it's open to artists. We strongly suggest that you put a team together. 4 people sounds about right to us. You need to include, if you can include somebody on your team who is actually African or African American, it wouldn't hurt. Someone who's a history major at your school in African American studies, an artist, a designer, because we're dealing with aesthetics, history, preservation. You really need to put a team together. Plus, it'll take your costs down. It's $100 to enter. If you enter with 4 people, that's $24 a piece. And you can enter as often as you like, because once you come into the portal, and we're still working on the techniques, you will get an anonymous number. We will never see who you are by name at all. All of the competition submissions, by the time they get to the jury, are totally anonymous. You can enter as many times as you like. You can do 1, all 4 sites.
Renee, can you talk about students entering the competition? We had a question in the chat about students.
Yeah, it's very simple. You literally would just go to the competition site and register. It's as simple as that. We have made this very, very uncomplicated. Now, I've had a number of talks with Michael Monti, who's a great supporter of the idea. He is executive director of the Association for Collegiate Schools of Architecture. And he has assured us that once we get this website up and mounted, because right now it's a place saver, you can go to the site, but it's a place saver. Once we get the competition site up and rolling, what's going to happen is Michael Monti is going to shoot this to 140 schools of American architecture. And then we also have Natalie O, who has this connection with African architects and schools on the, it's going to be worldwide and multi-site, multi-dimensional and multicultural. Yes.
Okay, we'll also add a nice plug here for those looking to pick a few tips in designing African-inspired architecture, which we saw a lot of in your presentation. CPDI, Africa.org. Go there, visit.
Absolutely go there. She's our girl. She is our African connection to architecture on the continent. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Renee.
You.
Magical.
We're going to have fun. This is going to be fun.
You are magical. Thank you, Renee. And Vicki, this has been an incredible presentation. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it, Renee, but you put it all together. It was all in there. So I'm really excited about seeing what comes out of this. This will truly be Africatown's version of Wakanda, and it's going to be the truth. How you designed it, it's perfect. So well done.
We'll be talking to you next week, Madam Juror. Okay.
Okay.
Don't go too far.
I won't.
Because we're going to have all of the jurors on a Zoom call within the next 30 days. Okay. I'll talk to you sooner than that, of course.
This is great. This is great. All right. So, man, this is great. I don't even know how to end this, but I'm going to turn it back over to Civic Design Center. And I just want to say thank you once again to Renee for putting this presentation on tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Valerie, really, for hunting me down, you know, for insisting that I do this. I have a special place in my heart, as you know, for anybody who is NOMA. Because I mean, this whole notion of who are we as architects of color in the profession, that's what being a NOMA member is about. So this is self-discovery for all of us on that level. And I have to thank the forefathers and the foremothers of NOMA for making us concerned about our community to the extent that we're also concerned about being the professional.
Absolutely. And we have one more question from Joseph in the comment box. He said, this is a very large competition with multiple components. Can you submit entries for only one site or component, or are you required to provide design for each site and component?
Okay, so the way this works is you pick one site. Once you pick a site, you've got to design all 4 buildings in that site. You've got to. And you can pick multi-sites, but you can't come in and design just one building. You can design one site with 4 buildings, but you cannot submit for just one building. And I saw Craig Wilkins post a note here. Thank you, Craig. Craig brought an entire studio from University of Oregon down to Africatown. And we put those kids on field survey work, and they came back with a whole bunch of stuff about housing conditions and vacant lots that are also going to be on the website. Because if you select site number 1, which is the historic district, one of the things you'll have to design are 30 facades for infill housing. So thank you, Craig. Yeah. And Craig, also want to know if there will be an email address for this recorded segment.
Sure.
Yes. The Civic Design Center will have that. We'll send it out to the attendees, and we'll also have it on our website too.
Eric, you want to take it away since you're talking now?
Yeah, might as well. Might as well. Yeah. So I'm Eric Hoke. I'm the design director at the Civic Design Center. And so on behalf of the Design Center, I just want to thank Renee for her time tonight and helping us with this Urban Design Forum. It was a really exciting program, and we really look forward to the competition. So we're really excited about that. Also, thanks to Valerie for getting us all together, and all the NOMA Nash folks, as we couldn't have done this program without y'all. So really looking forward to the next one. Our next event is called Pechakucha Night, and if you haven't been to Pechakucha, you got to come because it's a blast. It's more fun in person, but it's still fun on Zoom. And so our next one will be our 38th volume, and it's called Amplifying Black Perspectives, and it looks at designers, creatives, and architects from in our community, and that will be on March 10th. So I think Veronica actually put a link in the chat. So if you're not a member and you want to attend more Design Center events, just scroll to that link there, and I think it's there it is, complimentary ticket. So yeah, join us on the 10th, and thanks everyone for joining us and spending your evening with us. So good night, everyone.
Not everybody. Thank you.
Thanks again. I forgot to do a shout out to Vicki Howell. Thanks, Vicki. That's my biz partner.
Thank you all. Thank you, Renee. Talk later. Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.